Uh, Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. This webinar, jointly hosted by Mitek Systems and Lloyds Scottish Widows, is on the topic of securing pensions in the age of AI-powered fraud. What we're actually going to explore in this session is how the pension sector can protect one of its most valuable assets, which is the trust of its customer base. As pension companies strive to drive up engagement with their customers, in order to ensure that they have good pension outcomes, we'll be looking at how modern approach to identity verification and authentication can protect against fraud. And in particular, we're going to be looking at sort of the modern rise of AI-generated fraud. We'll explore this through some real-world examples and challenges. We'll show some technical information about how that works. And we're going to hopefully demonstrate how identity verification can increase the level of assurance and security and efficiency in the processes around customer engagement. And then we're going to move on to getting some really valuable insights from the real world from Ciara from Scottish Widows and the approach that they've taken to these challenges. So let's start with introducing the panelists. Matt, would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Wynne. I'm a senior consultant at Mitek. I work with banks and large finance on the solutions they require, with a special focus at the moment on AI fraud, which I'll be talking about later.
Thanks very much, Matt. And Ciara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks for inviting me to come along today as well. It's really great to be here. So my name is Ciara Mhathuna. I am a product owner in Lloyds Banking Group. So I'm sitting in the identity and authentication platform where my team, I'm head of the identity products there. And perhaps relevantly to today's conversation, before I took on that particular role, I was also the product owner of Scottish Widows app for 5 years. So hope I can bring some views on that engagement challenges that we face there in Scottish Widows app to the conversation today.
Thank you very much, Ciara. So I will briefly just sort of frame the conversation before we get into it. So some of the key challenges that we're going to be exploring and talking about are the fact that in the pensions industry, there is often a large legacy customer book that dates back decades in some cases. Layer into that a fairly regular pattern of mergers and acquisitions in the industry, and an aging customer demographic. It makes it ripe for fraudulent attack, but particularly because pensions are often one of the largest, or if not the largest, asset that people hold. It makes it a very attractive target for fraudsters. Coupled with that, you have very infrequent and irregular customer interactions, particularly over the early life of a pension. People might not access their pension from 1 year to the next. And I know that's one of the key challenges that the industry is grappling with. Then you have a lot of legacy processes and systems that need to be modernized. I myself experience working with at least one of my pension providers who still does everything with paper, which is interesting. And then finally, the rapidly evolving threat landscape. And in particular today, we're going to be looking at AI and how AI can be used in order to perpetrate frauds such as impersonation of a pension holder themselves, but also their family members, or indeed a financial advisor. Attacking the process and the system from lots of different angles is one of the approaches that fraudsters take. So combining a very high value asset with perhaps an aging demographic who aren't particularly tech savvy and used to using online channels, it makes them a real target. So driving engagement in order to make sure that people have good pension outcomes is fraught with navigating a variety of fraud and security risks. So Matt, I'm going to ask you to kick off by sharing your perspectives on some of these challenges before we then move on to hearing from Ciara about what they have done about it.
Okay, thanks. So have you passed control to me?
Yeah, all yours, Matt.
Thank you. Let's get that next slide. There we go. So you may have seen slides like this before, and you probably guess what the answer is. What do all these people have in common? And we see sophisticated deep fakes. Clearly, they don't exist. And these tools that you can get your hands on, and get your hands on, fraudsters can certainly get their hands on, are relatively easy to acquire. They don't push play. Can't find. Here we go. You literally they're almost toys. Some of these things, they're apps, they're downloadable content, or very, very low subscription prices that are very, very worth doing for a fraudster. You can see there, it's very simple to swap faces. I'm a lot slimmer there, quite like that one. But you don't need to necessarily be spending a lot of money on these tools. And you may look at some of those images and think, well, I've seen better. Yeah, with very, very expensive tools, you can get a lot better. If you think how these images are presented, they're presented to automatic systems. Some of these things without suitable protection in place can get through. Now, they're clearly not going to have a Mitek hat on, but they're relatively cheap to do. You need quite decent laptops that can run the processing, but this is far from expensive for a fraudster to produce. But whilst we see that kind of stuff, we're actually seeing more frequently, and we've been seeing these types of images for a couple of years now. When we look at the stats, we're seeing more sophisticated images coming through, but we still see a lot of this, and they fall into two broad areas. You've got those type of attacks that are using like a generative AI face. So what we're doing here is taking the face from the document and applying it to that guy there. Now, admittedly, if you have a good look at it, it looks a bit lizardy. You've seen better, but that tech is continually evolving. But think about how this onboarding process works. What you've got is, or whether this is onboarding or whether this is checking they are who they say they are, you often will be checking against bureaus. So they present you with real data. They've got the name and address of the person that exists. They're going to match the Ciara. This is a real document, hence me covering the actual name and address on it. So the doc check's going to work. So what they're doing there is now taking that face and overlaying it onto their own face. If I go to the next one, same guy, but not just because of the background, and we do have stuff we can do with backgrounds too. Same guy, same attack. His face has been taken from the doc, real data, and a real doc. And again, we're not sensitive to the color there, we wouldn't be, but it's more the proportions, and if you imagine the vectors overlaying each other and the stuff that we give our neural networks to work with. Similarly, we do it again, we've got same guy, and he's getting a bit adventurous now. And we've got tons and tons of examples of this. So that is where, think of the three things: it will match the bureaus, the document will pass, the face has to match. So we have technologies in place to not just make sure the face is captured live, but that face is not a deep fake or a virtual camera, and I'll be showing you some of that. We're also seeing the other way around, where we have a real face being presented, so that will pass liveness. It's a real face. The data is real. It's going to the bureaus. That's real too. And what we've got are exceptional fakes, and we see these exceptional fakes increasingly. Indeed, you can go and buy these fakes. We wouldn't tell you where, but you can go and buy these fakes, and they are good quality. So what we need to do is have a way to spot those fakes. And what we do with our neural networks, we train these neural networks, and for your compliance purposes, our human supervised and all the governance you'd expect neural networks. So this is a slightly different way around, where what we've got is a real face, real data, but a great fake. And those fakes can be presented or they can be injected, and we have technology in place to do that. And we identified, once we'd seen that what was going on here, we swept for, there are other layers there in place. We looked at IP addresses, and we identified, sounds very exciting, a Serbian cell that were attacking a certain big bank. And they weren't just doing it from Serbia. They were boots on the ground. They were recruiting what you could describe as kids locally who were just drawn in that. So, you can't just rely on spotting from a digital point of view. You've got to roll out and look at all the other factors that are available. And you'll hear me say a few times, this is a layered approach. Okay. So when we gather those faces, be they from the docs, be they from the actual presented face, we're also able to compile those into what we would call, if you like, a rogues gallery. It's we call it a face block list, and you're able to manage those lists. There are limitations, if you like, that are more legislative than technological in terms of how that information can be shared. Obviously, the fraudsters aren't limited by the legislation. It's an irrelevance to them. So we have this continual war of attrition where we're continually training our neural networks and refining our tools to cope with that unfair, if you like, war of attrition. So if I show you a journey, a typical journey, this might be an onboarding. This might be a checking you are who you say you are. Let's push play there. This is just an example journey. We both push play. There. It is playing, is it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So this took straight into a journey. Nice, simple instructions. There is nothing stopping any pension company getting hold of this methodology. No integration whatsoever involved in this. You're asking the person to put the face in the oval. Since COVID and the NHS app, everyone's used to put their face in the oval. It's not such a big scary exercise to do. Choose a document. I might want to register this document for future use. Maybe I want to register this document so that if I ever want to come in and make changes, I can save that face. We use our MySnap technology to capture what is a glossy image. It can be quite difficult to capture, but when we give feedback to the position it, when the image is right, the image is taken, so there's no button shake or anything like that. We run checks. We run checks that the face has been gathered live and has not been injected. We check that the document is good, and more importantly, we check that the face matches the document, and that's where all those scores come from. Once complete, it then goes through, and you'd be redirected either to go in and update your pension or onboarded into your pension. Okay, but say I don't do that. Say as a fraudster, I don't want to do that. So if we go to the next slide. In this case, what I'm doing is, there we go, it's scrolling. It's the same thing, but I want to avoid putting my actual real face, because I'm a fraudster, let's say, in there. So what I'm going to do now is come in, but before I capture my face, I'm going, hang on, I don't want to do my face. I want to use my virtual camera. So what I'm able to do then is switch on my virtual camera, OBS, readily available virtual camera kit. You can see a proper villain sat there. I start that camera. I then tab back to my journey. I push camera, very skillfully lean out of the way, right, quite technique, and then turn on my virtual camera. The virtual camera does the movement. I could have gathered that from anywhere. I then add my document for speed purposes here. I'm going to allow upload. You can choose to only allow live capture. Indeed, increasingly we're seeing that. But in this case, what I'm trying to get across is I haven't presented my face. I'm a fraudster here. I don't want to show my face, but as a pension company or a bank, I don't want to tip them off either. I want to keep them involved. I want to keep them incriminating themselves. So I keep it all nice, the journey nice. This can all be done hosted like this. It can be an app. Doesn't really matter. Just let that process. It's having to think about that because it's found something untoward. And then it does it, redirects. Okay, can take you back into journey, back into the rest of the journey, or stop dead there. If we look at the, you can see that I'm saying passport process. I'm not saying, well done, here's your money. We're not, we're saying that stage is complete. What we've got here now, when we review the results as you, the client, we're able to come in and look at that. And you can see there in that last attempt, I've got loads of signals, loads of warnings. I've been unconfirmed. This is not a good attack. We've got a face found in the gallery. We've got liveness fails, deep fake fails. We've got all sorts of velocity information. We can see in real time what they were doing. And if we look at the one I did before that, the good one, okay, I've got a velocity rule switched on, but that's just, it's my demo account. The velocity rule's going to happen all the time. The point being, you didn't want necessarily loads of refers. You want us or organisations like ourselves to help you with that. We work with you to understand your operational requirements. Say, well, we haven't got a lot of bums on seats agents to go through all this data. So actually, we need you to help us with the decisioning. So we can build rules in. If we see signs of a deep fake or injection or velocity, we can stop it there. So let's go to the next slide. Let's play the same one again. I think we're both clicking here. So, and then this is our MyPass functionality. So what we've got here, if you play that, thank you. We've got focusing specifically on that registering the face. Let's push go. So what I'm demonstrating here is how with my face, I'm, instead of relying on credentials, logins, God forbid, card readers or anything like that, I'm able to use my face, put your face in the oval, hold still, and then access the information I need to. This may be my pension account. It may be I want to move money around. It might be I want to do risky account takeover type behaviors where I want to change mobile numbers. Yeah, we know one-time passwords as a vulnerability. With this off-device face, it's not on the device. It's not requiring thumbprints, anything like that that can be got around by even your own family. Yeah, I've got to put my face in the oval. I want to make changes. I can then come in. And so we're just checking your face. Yes, that's what Wynne looks like. I can now come in, edit mobiles, move money around, make any changes I want to do. Okay, next slide. So what we have here are a number of layers. So we've got, again, layers. At the very beginning, you've got, does this person exist? Are they on the bureaus? If you're doing those level of checks, but it's, they've given you the name of someone that exists. Do they have something in their possession that person would have? Government issued identity document with security features and your face on. Does your face match that document? Has that face been gathered in a safe environment? And then we have these additional layers that fit into the journey, be that an app, an SDK, a hosted journey, where let's check the software, let's insert a payload at the point of collection so that we can be sure that it's not been interfered with, and examine that payload, that bit of code, when we come to review the images. Let's insert another layer of deepfake and image manipulation detection, looking for visible and non-visible elements. Let's add to that some AI-powered injection attack detection that we train, again, human supervised. This is good, this is bad, binary result out of that. And then let's add to all that high-tech digital layers some good old analog velocity. In the same way that we have velocity for name, mobile number, email, document numbers, we've now got velocity for faces. You add all those things together, you end up with a very robust solution. So, and that fourth layer is where we tend to catch, if all that tech doesn't catch them. We know that fraudsters are greedy. Fraudsters are industrialized, and they tend to hit you repeatedly. So rather than it being a one-off hit, they're coming at you, they're coming at multiple clients. We use that against them to be able to say, we've seen this face, we've seen this doc, we've seen it here, we've seen it there, and we're able to flag that and create alerts on that basis. There we go. So yeah, so I hope from that, what you've gleaned from that is that there are lots of approaches you can use. The tech is continually evolving. The fraudsters are getting the hands on cheaper and cheaper kit that allows them to perform these frauds, and we can help you stay with those fraudsters. So yeah, I'd like to hand back to Tim and Ciara to further discussion.
Thank you, Matt. Hopefully that was piqued people's interest. In order to solve for the problems, we have to look at what the problems are. And at Mitek, we spend a lot of time playing around with different types of fraud to test whether or not they're viable, to test whether they're economically viable, and then how do you mitigate against them, and then how do you build software products to combat the different types of digital and AI generated fraud that we see. And that's a constant battle that we go up against. But I really want to move on now to hearing from Ciara. Ciara, thank you so much for joining us on this call. We really, really appreciate it. What I'd like to start actually is the whole issue of engagement. You've shared with me in the past that your main objective is to ensure the best outcomes for your members. and to have them engage with their pensions. So if you could start by just explaining some of the challenges that you felt that you needed to address in order to achieve those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. So, as you said, you can't really talk about pensions without somehow getting into a conversation about pension engagement. It's always going to come up there. So, when we were launching Scottish Widows app, we did a lot of research into what does good engagement look like and how do you get more customers engaged. So what we found is when we went out and spoke to customers who were properly engaged with their pensions, they were doing things like they were looking at how to diversify their portfolio. They were actively managing their funds. They were very, very engaged. They were, actively in there every day. And that meant when it looked like, well, what do we need to do to create an app for these people? A little bit of friction wasn't going to put them off, right? They were, they were trying to do something. They were very task driven. They were very motivated to come in and achieve what it was they were going to do. So they were really comfortable with friction. However, what we found when we were researching kind of across the entire customer base before we launched Scottish Widows app is that group of customers who are highly engaged is only about 10% of all our customer base, right? So 10% are engaged, that leaves the other 90% who really are nowhere near where we wanted them to be in terms of engagement. So what we found from those customers was they struggled with things like, the very basics. They did not know who their pension provider was. So in the case of most of us now with auto enrollment, we have workplace pensions. It is the employer who is making the decision on who your pension, who's, the purchasing decision there. They're making the decision on which provider to go with. So the end customer has no say in that at all. They're just going along with whoever their employer has set up for them. And because people are so unengaged, they really don't know who their pension is with. So, you go out and talk to them like, I've got this one. And then I was with this employer, and they'll name the employer rather than the pension company. So that was a huge problem for customers. So what we found from those customers in terms of their needs, they weren't looking to diversify funds or anything like that. What they had was two core needs that we needed to meet for them. And it was a very basic, what do I have and will it be enough, right? And that's what they needed from a pension perspective. So we needed to make sure that when we were getting them answers to that question, that it was really, really simple. We don't want them to have to jump through a load of hoops and have to do a really exhaustive process. So another thing that we needed to consider as part of the, how do we get customers to engage was what is the status of our data quality, right? And again, coming back to the employer decision. So workplace pension is going to be set up by the employer. So if the employer has poor data quality, or if the employer doesn't know you've changed address, then that's what flows through to the pension, right? So it's suffering there from a disconnect straight away. You'll also have issues quite frequently. You'll see women who they have a professional name at work, they've kept their pre-marriage name at work, and then have changed the name, say, on their passport to match that of their family and kids. So you'll see a lot of data discrepancies coming in there as well. And you'll also have just the kind of age old people just don't tell their pension provider when they've moved house. So we have a really lovely example of that. Our customer services team did a study where a couple of years back where they would ask customers who are calling in, what prompted you to call us today? And they're asking this to customers who called in to change their address. And you would think that, what prompted you to call us if you're calling in to go, hello, I'd like to change my address, would be that, well, I've just moved house. But they hadn't moved house, they'd moved employer. So the house move might have been 5 years ago. They just never got around to tell us. It was only when they went to shift employer that they said, okay, what's all the admin I need to do associated with that employer? So data quality it's quite a challenge within the pension industry because, again, coming back to that engagement thing. So all of that, the issues around customers not being aware of what their pensions are, the different needs there, that all led us to, in Scottish Widows, to a strategy of having progressive friction. I'll say that right. So what we wanted was for people to be safe and we wanted them to be engaged, right? So if you've got like a scenario where 70% of people don't know what's being paid into their account every month, you need to design your journeys around helping them grow that confidence and make it really, really easy for them to get access. So we looked at, okay, so how do we build in gradual complexity? How do you take them on a journey of understanding that understanding those basics before you start to move to more complex activities. So only when the customers are comfortable understanding all of that, do you start to get to the stage with those customers where they start asking, well, what can I do next, right? What else should I be doing with this pension? And for pension customers, that's really where you want them to be, right? You want them to start asking those questions so that we can support them then making decisions on how they can have a better financial future.
It's fascinating the more detail you go into it. I mean, I'm trying to imagine a world where you have data quality issues to that level with a customer base who might not even know that they've got a pension with you, let alone how much it's worth. I mean, the security and the protection challenges of that are really quite immense. I mean, when even your customers don't necessarily know what they hold, how do you go about building trust with people? Because trust has to underpin getting people to engage more, I would imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the building of trust, it is all about making sure that we are able to get the customers where they need to be, and then show them that we're helping them along the way, right? So it's showing them as much as possible that we've understood their needs, we've understood what they're trying to do, and we can get them there as quickly and easily as possible, right? So it is about building up that relationship again around what we never want to do with pension customers is go in with if you design things right around that 10% or hyper engaged or managing portfolios, and you present all of that to a customer who's not engaged, you're just going to switch them off completely. So you have to start at their level and gradually walk them through the journey. So just as I said, you want to gradually increase the complexity of what people are trying to do, and how you take them through that journey. That also applies for the core pension journey. So you want to start them with the basics. Here's what you have. Here's what you'll need, and talk them through the consequences of that, and then start to grow it from there. So they're starting to understand a bit more about how pensions work, how pensions can operate, and you start to look at things like, well, how do I surface more complex scenarios to them in a way that doesn't feel off-putting. So, coming back to that, people don't know who their pension is invested with. A lot of our customers, right, about 30%, did not even know that their pension was something that was invested. They thought, when we asked them to describe what's that big number there, they said, oh, that I'm assuming is what I've paid in plus any interest it's earned. So they see pensions as an interest-bearing account rather than something that's invested. So even showing them simple graphs of, here's how your pension is going. And when it starts to look like those kind of, it doesn't look like I'm saving, so it's going up quite linearly. It starts to have more of a stock market up and down to it. That, showing them that and helping to explain that in a really simple way does help bring them on that journey, and avoid making them feel stupid as well. Because I think a lot of people, when you talk to people about pensions engagement, it's really interesting because most people will start the conversation with, I should know this, but. So there's this huge kind of embarrassment around it. So it's helping them along the journey with that.
I mean, I really like the level of thought that you've put into the process of taking people on a journey. But I do know that you have digitized now. You have a massive uptake in your customer base, and you've digitized even quite a lot of what people would consider to be higher risk journeys, like drawdown and account changes and changing my details. How do you go about determining where and what level of friction you introduce into some of those higher risk journeys?
Yeah, very good. So I think like most other providers, we're on a journey, right, of digitizing our processes. They're not all there yet, but we're working through them all. So it does bring challenges when you try to do that, because just as Matt was describing there, the kind of the layers of controls you've in there, we've similar layers of controls within the pension world. So to start by, we want to develop something that's really simple, straight through journey for customers, but you need to start looking at what are all of those controls in there and how do we start digitizing all of those. So in the Scottish Widows example, what we did first was we started to do just a very basic threat analysis to understand where the risk lay for each journey. So we could just understand, what were the things that we might need to do there. So when you're talking about the simple basics around engagement of coming in, viewing your pension funds and looking at the projected values, they actually carry very little risk, right? So we could, we knew we could surface them without a massive control framework in there. So we could look to say, okay, how do we do this? Surfacing that, what do I have? Will it be enough? What will I need? And those type of journeys. really putting a lot of emphasis on those and really like focusing on making those as best we could while we built out the controls for the other journeys. So for things then that carried more risk, like going in and viewing your personal details, not even changing them, just viewing them, that's actually, it is going to surface a bit more data about you to a malicious actor. So we didn't surface that in the app until we had all the controls in place to be able to surface that. And then some of the other journeys, they kind of fit into two broad categories. So you've some that transactions that are specific to pensions that customers might want to do. So something like a nomination of beneficiaries. So in the pensions space, what that means is I'm setting a preference for who I want my pension to go to in the event of my death. So most customers, when we went out and talk to customers about this, they see this as something that's a very important decision, right? This feels something that's quite momentous. So, people think of it, and I think everybody here will agree, it's something that feels quite serious and quite significant. So we do have some friction in that journey because customers kind of expected it from us. They expected a bit of friction because of what an important journey it was. But the reality is there's really very little risk associated with that journey. Tim, if, for example, you were a malicious actor and you managed to hack into my pension and you filled out a nomination of beneficiaries form and you put yourself in there as the one to benefit from my pension, what would happen was in the event of my death, the pension company would go and speak to my executors, and the executors of my estate, my will would be brought up and they would say that clearly there I've indicated that my pension should be going to my husband and my son. And they, do a bit of investigation and figure out, well, Tim really has no bearings on this whatsoever. So the nomination of beneficiaries is a preference. It's not a dead cert that this is where the money's going. So after that investigation, they would resolve that, the money should be going to husband and son, essentially. So that's an example of a control that's in that journey, which means when we surface that online, we really don't need to have a massive amount of controls in there, because from a fraud perspective, it is quite low risk because of the other controls in that journey. The other category then on the higher risk journeys that I might want to do online. So that could be something like withdrawing money, putting your pension into drawdown, or changing who controls the account by going in and changing some of the personal details. For example, you just mentioned phone numbers there. So what we found is, like in those sort of scenarios, a solution like yours, a solution like Mitek's is absolutely perfect, because that's going to give us a really high degree of assurance that the person completing the transaction is actually the person to whom the pension belongs, and that's really what we want to establish there. And what we found when we've been rolling that out into our journeys is that customers are actually quite intuitively good at perceiving the risk of what they're trying to do, and how whether this is something that actually does carry a bit of risk or not. So they're comfortable, when we've asked them, can you go get your driving license to complete this transaction? They've been okay with that. They've been okay with that level of friction, because they've understood that that level of protection is something that's there to make them safe, right? So they're really good at understanding that. So for us, I think, going in and establishing what are all those controls, those layered controls, as Matt was talking about, understanding how we're going to be managing those controls, and that then tells us what sort of friction do we need to protect the customer. So it can be, it's always going to be a fine balance between, do you have so much friction that the customer can't engage? Do you have too little friction? You're always trying to get that balance. But we've done, I think we've managed to do that by listening to our customers and really having that strong understanding of what the risks are.
Yeah, and clearly you're doing a really good job of it, because you've got something like 1.3 million customers using your app. Yeah. But it occurs to me it's not all just about apps. You have lots of different channels that you engage with customers for all different aspects of their journey with you. Do you think about risk mitigation and fraud in a cross-channel context as well? So essentially threading identity proofing from one channel to the next. Is that something that features in the way that you look at the world?
Yeah, so we do have a view of the customer holistically across Lloyds Banking Group, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're a customer of Lloyds, Bank of Scotland, Halifax, Scottish Widows. We do kind of have that core entity of you're a customer. We're going to try and map all your data all together to make sure our data is accurate and we're meeting all our obligations there. And then we do start to look from there, what are the core risks that we'll be applying to the customer. In a lot of cases, for us, it's about making sure that we are protecting you and all your assets, no matter where you're coming in from. So it is, we do try and take that broader look around, if I allow something in this channel because it's low risk, am I actually creating a risk in another channel? So if I allow you to do something, say in a pensions environment that we would consider to be low risk, does that create risk for your bank account? So those are all controls we built in there as well when we're going to look at what a customer should and shouldn't be allowed to do, is to look at how deep is their relationship with the group, do they have products elsewhere, and trying to push them towards the right channel in which to complete that activity, so we can make sure that all of the controls are in place to keep them safe.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable the way that you pulled all of that stuff together. Did it change the nature of the way that you engage? Was that kind of an inflection point that in the whole experience?
Yeah. So on the pension side, so back in 2017, we had an initiative linked to our wider group strategy around making it easier for Lloyds, Bank of Scotland and Halifax customers to see their pensions online. So the very basic high level hypothesis was, we've got, through internet banking with those core brands, we've got a really broad customer base, right? 23 million customers across the UK, which is a significant part of the population. And they're logging in 7 billion times a year, right? So massive engagement. It's off the scale engagement, versus a pension app where people were logging in. Back in 2017, you only had the website. People were logging in once a quarter, right? So it was quite low engagement. So we basically had a bit of an experiment to go, what happens if you take this low engagement product, put it on a high engagement channel? What would that do to customers' behavior, and would that help them kind of get more in their pension? So when we first launched, what we did see was a flurry of feedback from customers, kind of asking us some of those questions around, why am I seeing this here? Because they didn't realise they had a pension with Scottish Widows. They didn't realise their pension was with Scottish Widows. They didn't realise that Scottish Widows was part of Lloyds Banking Group, all of these sort of questions. And then because they were seeing it alongside, say, their credit card, their next question was, right, can I take that money from my pension and put it up here to pay my credit card? So lots of kind of responses to the standard stuff, lots of responses to that. So once that kind of flurry of initial calls died down after we launched this, what we noticed was about 12 months later, the phones would start ringing again. And what customers were looking to do at this point was go, right, this has been in my app for a while now and I've been seeing it, and it's just prompted me, what do I need to do to start paying more money into it? Or what do I need to do to like consolidate my other pensions in here so I can keep track of everything in one place? So the tone of the conversation really started to shift just by demystifying it, right? There's a huge amount in pensions. If you make it easy for people to come in and see things, you start to demystify it and you start to break that down. So it just becomes easier for people to grasp, and they're more likely then to be more comfortable asking you those questions around, how do I save more for the future? So that really, that experience with launching, we call it our single customer view. So that experience with launching our single customer view really set us up to go, right, well, how do we replicate this across our digital channels? It was a lot of the rationale behind why we went after that progressive friction model when we launched Scottish Widows app, to make sure that because we knew from launching it on the Lloyds, Bank of Scotland and Halifax apps that if you could see it easily, you're more likely to engage with it. So we tried to replicate that on the Scottish Widows side then as well.
I mean, it's fascinating. So you started with a pensions app, and then gradually increased the amount of things that you could do with that, and then had the brilliant idea of putting it into a high use channel where people are using something and actually doing stuff day to day, like their bank account, where they're making financial decisions and they're spending money. And that the net effect of that is that people started to engage more with their pension
Yeah.
because it was easy to access. And then because they're in a mindset of I'm being financially prudent and I'm doing stuff, it starts to make them think about and do stuff with their pension. So not only are you getting engagement, you're actually pushing it towards the ultimate outcome, which is people have a good
Better
outcome at
retirement.
the end
Yeah.
when
It
they
was
retire.
actually the other way around. So we started with the view in the Lloyds app, and then from that we saw ease of engagement here. If you make it really, really simple for people to access their pension, they're more likely to get properly involved with it and get engaged. So that's where the design principles then that we took in when we were designing the Scottish Widows app.
Yeah, but that combination of much more frequent engagement, doing much more sophisticated things. What were some of the fraud protection implications that you considered when you started to make those quite broad steps?
So the fraud, yeah. So again, we come back to start looking at how do we support the customers? How do we do that kind of risk analysis around that, around the layers of control? So that was one of the key pieces we had to bring in there. So we also had when we looked at the kind of the fraud controls, we had to bring in there. We did a lot of I think that the fraud environment has changed over time, right? Since we started even with Scottish Widows app, and certainly since we started with launching it on Single Customer View. So back then, a lot of the frauds we were seeing were more kind of aligned to the apply push payment frauds that you might see in the banking space. So basically, the customer was being phoned up with a too good to be true offer of an investment. They were, it was all time pressured. You must do this now. It's an amazing opportunity. So the customer themselves was making the decision to transfer the funds across to the fraudster. We have seen in the past few years more of a rise of the type of frauds that Matt was talking us through at the start. So we'd class them as impersonation frauds, right? So somebody pretending, ostensibly to be the customer, either by fraudulent docs or by faking their face onto real docs. So we started to see more and more of that identity impersonation frauds coming through. So that did make us look at the controls we had in place there and look at how we can increase the controls in that area. And again, coming back to solutions like yours are key for helping us in stopping those frauds from coming through those channels.
I've got one last question for you, Ciara. It's probably a bit of a personal question because I've got two aging parents who are drawing down on their pensions. I mean, the demographic for pension age customers, particularly people who are actually starting to use their pensions, is especially high risk at the moment, where you've got an entire generation of people who haven't really engaged at all. From your perspective, what's the opportunity for pension companies like yourselves to actually improve the fraud resilience of that group of people in particular?
Yeah, it's a challenging one again, because I think that particular audience, so if you're at the age where you can draw down your pension, it's not, you can draw down, I think most people now can draw down from 57, so it's not that old. You can be digitally savvy, right, but you're not digitally native, right? You did not grow up surrounded by digital, right? So much like in the way that unless you're 3 years old, you're not AI native, right? So none of us, we can all be talking about AI, but we're not AI native. We did not grow up with this kind of inherent in everything we do. So people who aren't digitally native, and mixing that with the fact that until very recently, like until auto enrollment kicked in, right? Auto enrollment basically came in and started bringing more and more people into the pension sphere, right? And more people now have pensions, but the education and awareness around, what this is and how it works for you hasn't kind of picked up with that. So people have pensions now, but they don't have the same awareness and education around what they need to be doing to manage that pension. So for us, again, about keeping it low friction just to get engaged, right? That's key to it, because we can use that as an opportunity to start educating them, right? So we can help customers then understand what are the steps that they need to take to increase their fraud resilience. And by, publishing information online, we also kind of have things that we do within the workplace itself, where we go out and speak to workplaces about, things that they can be doing to prepare themselves. But we can start looking at the customer holistically and go, right, so if you're approaching these age, what are some of the things that you could do to really help yourself? And it's things like that basic data quality, right? If we don't know who you are, it's going to be very hard for us to make sure we're paying the money to the right person. So talking about data quality to a customer, but making it real for them. We're not just nagging you to do this. This is what you need to do to keep yourself safe. And also the engagement piece as well there. So, we're really good at, come back to my banking side, we're really good in the bank at kind of spotting when you're doing something that's a bit out of character for you, right? So if you're trying to make a payment and I'm in another country, it'll block you and go, hang on a second, I haven't seen you try to do this from the Netherlands before. Can you, so we'll step you up in security there. It could be really hard to do that in the pension space because you just don't have the right level of engagement in there to have behavioral patterns, right? So again, getting people engaged, getting that view of their behavioral patterns. Do they normally log in from Manchester? Do they normally log in from London? All of these are key indicators. So, trying to encourage people to be doing this as they're approaching retirement. These are all things that they can do that are very simple, very lightweight. Just log into it once a month. And that's giving us a lot of information there that we can use then to detect it's you from somebody else. So all of those things are all things that we can encourage customers to do and encourage them to take ownership of, and they really help fraud protection and fraud prevention because they strengthen the amount of signals that we have to be able to detect whether they're a customer or whether they're a fraudster.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ciara, for sharing that story. It is genuinely fascinating, and I happen to be a customer as well, and I know how good it is. But I think we'll leave it there. We've got about 10, 12 minutes left. Brian, I know that you wanted to open up the floor for questions at the end, so I will hand back to you to see if any questions have come in.
Yes, we've got one from James pointed to Ciara. So we know that pension account takeover is a huge issue, especially when you consider the pension regulator alert that came out last week. Many providers are moving to this method of biometric authentication for high-risk journeys. Is the biggest risk this will drive fraudsters back to offline journeys and traditional telephone fraud?
That's a really interesting question. And I think, James, you're spot on, right? Our controls cannot just be online, they have to be multi-channel. And actually, so Tim, when we first started working with you guys on our pension drawdown journey, we've actually applied that to our telephony journeys, right? And that's where it went in first. So we were sending the invite out to customers to ask them to do that there. So fraud is like water. It will find the gaps. It will find the way through. So you have to look at what is my multi-channel approach to this, because if you have any opportunity where it's easy to do something on one channel and difficult to do it on the other, everything will flow towards that easy channel, and that that means the fraud will flow there too. So if you've got something like a change of address journey where it's easier to do in one channel, it doesn't have the same controls, that's where that will be your weakest link then. So applying a multi-channel approach and applying solutions and those controls around a multi-channel approach has been key to our Scottish Widows approach to this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of read acrosses to the banking sector as well there, particularly in the US. Our customers report that because we've shored up all of their online channels, fraud is starting to re-manifest itself in branch as well, because people have figured out that it's still somebody who doesn't necessarily know what a proper passport looks like.
Yeah.
Brian, do we have other questions?
Yep, I've got another one. I think this one's for Matt. So referring back to, I guess, Matt's presentation slightly earlier, what we've seen is exceptional fakes with a suspect's face and a selfie taken at the same time. How does Mitek establish that a document is an exceptional fake?
Okay, good question. I'll just add a little bit more to the last question too about that omni-channel approach. So we have our solutions are also used in telephony and in branch. You can still, in telephony, we've got a bank that, when it comes to a manual payment, that risky behavior or a closing an account, they're able on the phone to have just sent you a request. They get a text message. They have to go through the same standard of check. So they might not have it start online, but you can still use these digital techniques in a telephony, and also we've got branch staff using and creating and scanning QR codes to invoke those same journeys. Back to the main question about exceptional fakes. It's a very good question, and some of which I can tell you, some of which that you never know. There could be a fraudster trying to learn something on this this webinar too. So I won't tell you exactly, but the methodologies are, and I'll cut to the quick. You've got to be fleet of foot. And as you grow as an organization and get more kit and more employees and more division of labor, staying fleet of foot is difficult, and it's key. And by fleet of foot, I mean that developers can move quickly, that your neural networks can be updated quickly. So that where we see new templates, new exceptional fakes coming in, we're able to pick up on those new brands of fake, if you like, and there are always features in there that we can take and quickly train our neural networks to spot. Good is this, bad is that. We also, it sounds comical, faces and documents can be too similar. So if someone, when they get their selfie manufactured, or they get their card manufactured, and they use their face and they present the same face, they're not going to, the copy of the face, the person they want to impersonate, if they're too similar, like 100%, that's bad as well. So there is some degree of fuzziness that you need in there, some degree of blur. But I'll be honest, it's difficult, and the way to spot those exceptional fakes is you have to keep, where you do find them, train your neural models. And it's not just about the document. You also can pick up on certain IP addresses, certain use of anonymizer services, certain devices. We've seen a lot of, I won't name the device, we've seen a lot of activity with a certain kind of device because it was cheap to buy, cheap to put emulators on. We're onto them. So yeah, it's a long answer as ever, but staying fleet of foot is the key.
Matt, can you briefly outline the purple team approach that we take? Because I think that's relevant in this context as well.
Yeah, so you'll be familiar with the idea of red teams and perhaps a blue team. Well, we actually blended the two together and came up with the purple team. And what the purple team do is they are security professionals that deliberately try to break and mend and patch up where we find those issues. They are working closely with the developers, but also, we've had some, we've incorporated some, if you like, what you might call white hat attack people into that too. So yeah, it's basically in brief, a group of individuals within the company that specifically try to break and patch up on a continual cycle, and that feeds in their output of their work, feeds into the development of those neural models. It's an ever continuing process.
Thanks, Matt. Brian, we've got 7 minutes left. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I've got one for Ciara. Do you see a place for a reusable digital identity and how that could work across the Lloyds banking group?
Very interesting question. I think quite pertinent as well at the moment, given the rollout of the online safety bill this weekend. So, in answer, yes, right. We do see a need for it coming in. So if you look across, what's happening across the EU with IDAS, that's obviously going to change the landscape and change the environment that we're operating in, because we'll have more and more people with EU digital identity cards that they will be able to use, and you're setting that expectation there. I think looking at kind of some of the commentary on the launch of the Online Safety Act this weekend, it's been quite interesting, right? Because you have lots of people looking at things and saying, well, I don't want to share my driving license with Reddit, for example. I don't, sorry Reddit, but there's a vibe, but like I don't entirely trust that it's going to be okay. And people are kind of doing that all over. They might be on forums, they might be on sites, and they're not entirely sure whether they trust that site with a driving license or passport. So when you look at the GPG 45, right, the Good Government's Good Practice Guide 45 for how to identify a customer, the 5 core elements you have in there, so the kind of the strength, the validity, the activity, the fraud indicators, and the validation. Like banks do a lot of that. Just we have to, right? So we have to keep an eye on your activity. We have to be doing the ongoing know your customer checks. We have to be doing all of these things. We have to make sure we know that it's you when you're coming in to do anything. So there's a massive opportunity for banks then to go, okay, so you don't want to share your driving license passport with somebody else. How do we support you in that journey then, where we can do something that's a little bit more privacy maintaining, and it should be quite easy for you because we have a lot of that information anyway. We have to have that information as a bank, and we're doing things, all of that trust is built into your bank network anyway. So it's certainly something we're looking at and looking at the opportunities there, because I think there is a massive, I don't even want to say opportunity, I want to say responsibility for banks to help their customers there and really make sure that all of that data that we have in them, that we can help the customer use that in a way that's making sense for them in the online world.
On that subject, do you think there is, because people do routinely share their personal details with banks, they share their documents, they share their faces, do you think there is hypothetically a role for banks to then feed that back into the ecosystem as a set of verified credentials? So for example, age verification, you don't necessarily want to share everything with a company that needs to age verify you, but if you were able to just say, well, here's a verified credential of my age, underwritten by Lloyds Bank or provided by Lloyds Bank, and I'm not telling you who I am, but I'm just proving that I'm over 18.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to it, right? So if you look at the physical model, right? If I'm in a supermarket, and I'm buying a bottle of wine, right? I scan it through, and then I have to wait for the customer or the customer service person to come over and tap the code in and swipe their ID card or whatever it might be. And it's a friction in my journey, but it's not massive, right? And my privacy is maintained because they're just looking at my face and going, clearly over 18, tap, 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 and away they go. If I was a bit more youthful looking, the journey there will be, I would have to produce my age or my ID card. So I'm straight away sharing my name, my date of birth, my address, all of this, when all the question that has been asked is, are you over 18? But I'm sharing a lot more information. So I do think getting towards a model of maintaining that privacy for customers and just sharing the data attributes that need to be shared. I think there's also a huge win for companies that are getting more savvy to the sort of data risks that they are kind of ending up in, because they are taking too much PII from customers when they really don't need it, and then they are leaving those vectors out there, so they're being hacked because they've got all this PII out there. I think there's opportunity for companies who don't really need that much information but do need to certify that you're over 18, for example, to basically outsource all of that to somebody trustworthy like a bank, because we have to have all that information anyway. So I think there's an opportunity there for banks to do something in that space.
Excellent, Ciara. Thank you. So we've got a minute or so left. Probably a good time for me to wrap up. First of all, I'd like to say thank you ever so much, Ciara. That was brilliant. It was a pleasure listening to it. And Matt, thank you very much for giving us a whistle-stop tour of all things fraud that are AI related. Just to summarize the key things that we talked about, there's a lot of unique challenges in the pensions industry, but one of the most important is that the people are uniquely vulnerable to all sorts of attacks, and that is sort of amplified by the fact that there is generally low engagement. There are systems and process challenges in the industry, and because a pension pot is such a valuable asset, it is a target for fraudsters, and the level of fraud is evolving very quickly at the moment, and is outstripping traditional defences. So new defences are required in order to combat new fraud vectors and new attacks. That's what Mitek is all about. We happen to be built for very, very high assurance fraud detection and prevention because we focus on a highly regulated industry. So we have to be very good at it. And we are working with thought leaders in the financial services industry, like Lloyds, like Scottish Widows, to really help define what good looks like, because robust identity proofing and robust authentication is actually a cornerstone of what you're actually trying to achieve, which is get people to engage with their pension so that by the time they get to pension age, they can live comfortably and enjoy themselves, which is what we're all about. So again, thank you very much to both of you for joining us. I hope everybody on the audience found it useful. You can always reach out and if you have more questions, and we'll field them to the right people. But on that note, bang on. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Yes, thanks.